Were there any other questions? Was there someone?
He's answered.
I'm happy to do this.
You guys are both in the comics industry and stuff, and being in the industry, does it affect, like, you guys still read comics? If so, what are you reading?
Yes, I read comics. I've always been sort of influenced by animation cartoons. I have a very sort of cartoony style, but more and more I've grown to love comics as a medium to tell stories. What am I reading at the moment? Saga. Have you read Saga? Saga's amazing. You know, you were asking about page turners. What Saga does is just phenomenal. But yeah, stuff from like Saga, Sex Criminals, which is, have you read that? That's amazing. No one's read Sex Criminals.
It's on my to-do-list.
You have to. It's really, 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 really good. Nail Biter. Have you seen that? It's about a town full of serial killers. It's fascinating too. So this is one I'm reading at the moment.
I'm also reading Saga, but slowly. My problem is that once you're doing comics, I don't have a local comic shop anymore because of where I live. There's just not one. So I catch up on them whenever I go traveling or I do a store signing and they give me things. So I'm way behind. I also I found that reading novels is a better fuel for the imagination at this stage, because when you're reading comics, they can corrupt your own vision of things in a good and bad way, where it can become intimidating and then you lose your confidence to do your own thing, or it can become distracting where you're thinking of somebody else's stuff while you're trying to do your comics. So I'm trying to, I don't know, find that in, I was like going back to what I was saying to you, like trying to find that inner voice and see that part of it through. But Saga is fantastic. Brian K. Vaughan, I got to work with him once, and we did a Midnighter story where the whole thing read backwards. So he's a guy who really plays with the material. What else did I read recently? I like Michael Allred's stuff is great. Dan Slott's stuff. He's doing great stuff with Spider-Man. And I'm drawing a blank, and that's embarrassing. Because it's like this big pile of stuff, and I know as soon as I give the microphone back, I'll go, oh yeah! But I still love comics, but keeping up with them monthly isn't something that I can really do because of the way my job, like I was telling you about the cozy prison, so unless they're delivered, it's not something I can read regularly.
So yeah, I want to add, so Silver Surfer as well, that is fantastic. And iZombie, have you read iZombie?
Yeah, that's great. It's made it into a TV show.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but that's phenomenal. I love that, the style. I thought it was interesting you saying about like looking at, I try not to look too much at good art, because when I see it I just feel intimidated, and you look at, I'm not drawing like that. Even like sort of so a lot of people with Simpsons comics, a lot of people work on it, and I look at the other, like sort of flick through other people's stuff and go, it's so much better, it's so much tighter, you know, and it's not good for my brain, and, you know, it can sort of drag me down a little bit. So I always, with Simpsons comics, how I got into it was, I was flicking through one of the comics and found there was a page that I didn't think was very good, and I thought, I could just about do that.
Yeah,
you know, this is the kind of like, it was like achievable art, you know, just things like a little bit better, but not so much better that it's, you know, but this, you know, and that kind of inspired me too. That's how I ended up getting, like, I started sending pages to Bongo, and that's how I started getting work for them, because I was inspired by mediocre art. Yeah.
Growing up in the industry, like there was a lot of that more in the late 70s and early 80s when they were just trying to get books out, and there just weren't as many people competing to work in that marketplace. And I always remember the best advice I got from an editor, which was also the worst thing to hear, but he said, when you can draw as well as your favorite artist, then you're ready to break in. Well, my favorite artist is Brian Ballin, and he's still like heads and shoulders better than I am, and it's still an unreachable goal for me. But I did some Judge Dredd coverage where people go, that looks like Ballin. I went, okay. I earned my right at the party at least. But yeah, I realized too, this is not a shameless plug, they're actually quite good. Where I'm sitting over here, Richard Fairgray and Bill Jarrett's wrote a comic, and they're called The Inspiration Duncans, and there's a whole like world around these characters. I just read a couple of their volumes because we're here, but they're quite good, so I would actually recommend them highly too if you're interested in new comics with great original ideas. Pick up Richard Fairgray and Bill Jarrett's stuff over at this booth where I'm sitting.
I draw something and I'm pretty happy with it, but then like, a couple of weeks later I start to see all the faults more and more, and the stuff I've done a couple of years ago, I can barely look at it.
Yes.
Are you the same?
Absolutely. Like I've yet to read anything all the way through. Like people have said, oh, I'm rereading Transmet for the 4th time, which is really flattering, but I can't look at that stuff. All I do is constantly edit now. Like anything that I did a year ago, I'm like, oh. Or if I didn't ink it myself, I'm like, oh. Or if I did ink it myself, I go, oh. Because it's a constant state of like looking at your stuff to correct it. Because I feel like it's like being a shark. Creatively, it's like being a shark. Like if you're not constantly swimming and feeding creatively, you're gonna die. You know, because nobody is ever gonna wake you up in the morning and go, okay, you draw better today. Nobody ever does that to you except you, and you can get away with a lot. Once you've got to a certain level, you can slack off and nobody will even notice. But I never want to be that guy.
Any other questions? Microphone you?
How does the process of making comics differ from other creative industries?
I've never worked in other creative industries, so I don't know. This is my imagination. You'll have better answers to this, but I would imagine, it's very isolating. Sometimes it's very solo. I spend a lot of time on Facebook just so I can talk to people. But at the same time, I think you were talking about almost like being the director of your thing. There's nothing like comic books that I can imagine that are as cheap to create like something from nothing. That's like a film or like animation. Tom Taylor is a fellow Australian, and he's written lots of stuff, but one of his properties has been turned into an animation, and he was saying to me how hard it is because they have to cut things because it's so much more expensive. In comic books you don't have to cut. If you want the city to be destroyed, sure, you can do it in 3 panels. That's pretty remarkable, and I can't imagine anything that could, be like that. We're like gods.
You said it really well. The big difference between comic books and from my experience, because I've dabbled in other entertainment industries. I've storyboarded for some movies, and I've worked in advertising, and so those are creative mediums as well. But what I've discovered is that there are many more cooks in the kitchen when the bigger the production is. So you don't get to be the final say on what you want your scene to look like. You have to hope you get it right. Because if they need something different for you in advertising, you're going to make changes because they're paying you a lot of money, and that's what their ultimate goal is. Something you're just a tool to reach their goal. Like they need you to visualize what they're seeing, not the other way around. It's not my job. Where I had that passionate speech about Wolverine is because Wolverine felt like mine, but he wasn't. And so the higher up you are creating, the more you're going to be asked to jump through hoops and change, and you're going to disappear more in the background. What's beautiful about comics is that you kind of get to be the star of your own show, and the more you can completely create a world, the more people will respect that world and say, oh, that's yours. We like what you're doing, do more of what you're doing. Comics can be, but like Dean was saying, it's a very intimate experience. It's very few industries or creative mediums. I liken it to rock and roll because with music, if I wanted to sing you a song, I could pick up my guitar and plug in my guitar and step in front of the microphone, and the moment I start playing and singing, it's me to you. You guys hear that immediately. We're having a connection creatively. Whether or not you like the song or whatever, how it moves you, that's going to be right there. It's an instant. But with comics, it's sort of the same thing, except it's like a very slow-moving song, in that I spend all this time alone in my studio creating what I think is going to be an orchestra, and months later it gets printed and released, and then people I start getting feedback. And but that filter between what I created on my board and what you see is the same as me in front of a microphone speaking to you, just on a slow delay. So there's very few people in between, especially with independent stuff like I'm doing now. What I want to do is what you guys see, and that's a really nice thing, because there's very few industries. With a movie, for example, the director, you'll often hear in horror stories about, thanks man, there's a disconnect where you'll hear horror stories about directors like, oh, I had this vision for a movie, but it was running too long, like Dean was saying, and so I had to cut this scene that was really precious to me, because there's producers, and there's when a movie ends, you see a list of credits that goes on for almost 15 minutes. With a comic book, you glaze over that credit scene after you've turned page 1, So so as an artistic experience, it's closer to the audience, and honestly, without sounding like a suck-up, I really love comic book fans for that reason, because it's also a very special person that will take the time to really absorb what you've created and appreciate it, as opposed to TV where it's almost passive. You can stumble on it easier. With comic books, they have to be sort of sought out, and people have to care enough to take the time to read them, and therefore they tend to be more thoughtful fans, a lot more opinionated too, which is a double-edged sword. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. What's that? I'm sorry, it's too much background noise.
It answers half my question, because within the creative industries, it's also the process itself. Are you still using more or less the same process of pre-production, production, and
as I was telling this gentleman, the difference in what I do now digitally enhanced. Digital helps like another tool, but the basic process is still the same, at least for me, in that I start with a blank piece of paper and a sharp pencil, and I take straight edges and I lay out a page and I sketch out figures. I can't compete with this. And so, but I still have to lay out a page with straight edges, and I start with a blank piece of paper. When I'm all done now, I can digitally enhance and clean up. I scan my page when it's an inked page, and I put that in, because I still love the feeling of having an original piece of art to wave around in the air and actually hold as a physical object. It's just I don't think I'll ever get over that feeling of accomplishment if I can hold the piece and look at the piece, as opposed to looking at the screen and working all day like that. But when it's all done, I scan it into my computer and use Photoshop to correct mistakes. I can adjust things that maybe I didn't get right on the original, but I can digitally manipulate it a little bit to make it just so on the page that you see. And I can also add special effects, which I've learned to do better and better over the course of working on a book called Ballistic. I drop things into the backgrounds, I make art out of the borders now. So just things that are it's another tool. But I don't feel guilty or like it's cheating anymore, because I recognize it's still me manipulating a tool, even if that tool is a computer mouse. I have to see what it is that I want it to look like and bring it home, like bringing a plane in, try not to crash it and try to make sure it touches down with all the passengers okay. But that's the difference between now and then. I can deliver it digitally, which actually buys me more time. which is a really good thing, because if something's due on a certain day and I have to get it in by like 5 o'clock, I have until 6 a.m. when I wake up, until 5 p.m., but I can deliver it at the last minute because I don't have to worry about making a FedEx drop or something like that, because I can all I have to do is send an email. And that's liberating, so the quality of the work goes up because I can spend more time with it.
Sorry.
It's so loud.
An Illustrated fan. But you're not a fan of digital. Straight on. Oh really? You colored with the Illustrator? You say not Photoshop? Yeah, thank you. So, absolutely. Again, it's another tool that we can use. Yeah, absolutely. I'll play around with some manga studio too. That's kind of cool as well.
I came in late, so I don't know if it's already been asked, but I wanted to know your thoughts about people that have the hatred between different universes, from movie verses and comic verses, like the different universes, and how a lot of stuff is left out of comic books. I wanted to know your thoughts on that. So when a movie's done or whatever.
Yeah, she was asking, did everybody hear her question? Okay, yeah, that's interesting. When I was a little kid, I liked Grimm's fairy tales. And what was interesting about Grimm's fairy tales is that, I assume you all grew up with the same ones that I did, Little Red Riding Hood. I know I'm in a different country, so I'm just assuming, but they came from another country, so I think we're okay. But I remember reading Little Red Riding Hood as a kid, little boy. And in the story, we all know that she gets lost and the wolf, and then the wolf is in there, and then the huntsman comes in and rescues them all. And then I got an old copy of Little Red Riding Hood, a really old copy. And it turns out that the huntsman comes in and cuts open the wolf's stomach and frees the grandmother who had been eaten by the wolf. And that was like so graphic and horrific. I went, wow, that's a dark story. But that was also the story of Little Red Riding Hood. But somewhere along the line, someone said that's too much for kids, and it got changed. Because it's myth. And the problem with myth is that it's manipulatable generation to generation. And what we're going through right now is that from a marketing standpoint, Marvel and DC have discovered that the movies are drugging people in the billions of dollars, where the comic books have now begun to earn thousands of dollars, if that. And the publishing industry is in the middle of a big flux. We have more distribution than ever, but we're finding ways to get people to actually purchase digital distribution. Is difficult because it's easily pirated. It's happening with music as well. So Marvel and DC have a choice. They've decided to throw out all the back history. Now that upsets a lot of people, because if you were the one that read Little Red Riding Hood growing up and grandmother was not cut out of the wolf's stomach, even though that might be the original idea, you want your version to stay intact, because somewhere in your mind it's their responsibility to protect your childhood dreams. Unfortunately, growing up means your childhood dreams die a slow death every day. And life is pointless, and the universe is dark and cold at the end. That's it, thank you. No, but so having an argument, there's, thought of an inappropriate joke, but there's a point where you can argue your passion for something, but you'll usually find that even your version of it has probably been changed from where it was originally conceived. For example, Wolverine. Who here loves and knows Wolverine? Okay. Now, did you know Wolverine's claws, are they part of his body? Yes, put your hands up if Wolverine's claws are part of his body, part of his internal structure. All right. Some of you didn't. Now, the original concept of the character, because I happen to know the guys that created him, those were things he strapped on. He originally was never supposed to. They were things that popped off, like they were guns on the side of his, like, manipulable, that's what his gloves were for. His claws hid in the gloves and they popped up, and they were just things that he used like tools. It wasn't until later they became part of his body, and it wasn't even later than that they became bones that eventually became, Addington. So like even Wolverine, and he was created in the mid-70s, has gone through those evolutions. And so there might be people that are still really pissed off because they know that those aren't supposed to be part of his body. So eventually it's just a matter of accepting that myth is going to be evolving, and that the movies are now, which are really good. I've actually shed a tear of joy watching the Avengers because I felt like I was finally seeing Captain America on screen. If you're in your 40s, you would remember that there was a Captain America in the 70s that had a motorcycle helmet and a clear visor and a clear shield made that looked plastic, and most of the thing was motorcycle stunts. Yes?
There's a difference between evolving like Darwin, which happens slowly, and evolving like X-Men, that happens quickly. As an artist, have you ever been in that dilemma between changing slowly versus just changing for the sake of it?
I don't know if you were here early, but I had a long story about when I got to work on Wolverine, and we rebooted it at #1, and at the time they loved what I did so much at Marvel, they had given me this exclusive contract, and the book was a big hit, and by the time we got to issue 7, the X2 movie had come out, and suddenly they wanted everything to reflect the movies. And so that was like, and then I suddenly was like hamstrung because I literally had to redraw finished, approved pages for no extra pay, so they could reflect what they wanted the character to look like then. Even though they had already said this work was great, we're going to publish it, they suddenly made me go back and start reworking it. That was being under